A lesson on the Indian Act. After all, we are still the Indian problem. As PM Pierre Elliott Trudeau said, we must now undertake to get the Indian problem out of the way. Section 6 defines who is considered an Indian under the law. This definition has changed over time, but it has historically been based on things like blood quantum, the percentage of indigenous ancestry a person has, and the Indian status of a person's parents or grandparents. Section 9 talks about how Indian status can be lost or given up. For example, if an indigenous woman married a non-indigenous man before 1985, she would lose her Indian status and any rights that came with it. A little tale of how we will erase the Indians through Indian status. A short tale. John's parents, who are both 6'1", meaning they're considered full-status Indians, had 2 kids, John and Carol. Both John and Carol are 6'1" full-status Indians. John fell in love with a woman who was not indigenous. They got married and had children. Because John was 6'1", his child still got Indian status, despite having a non-indigenous mother. His non-indigenous wife also became a 6'1" full-status Indian just like that. Meanwhile, John's sister Carol, a woman with 6'1" status, married a non-indigenous man, and their children did not get full-status Indian 6'1". They now became 6'2" status Indian, and her non-indigenous husband did not become status whatsoever. Time has passed, and now Carol's children have grown up, and her son, who is a 6'2" status Indian, now marries a non-indigenous person, or even someone with Metis ancestry, but now officially their children do not get Indian status. Meanwhile, John's son, who is 6'1" status Indian, marries out to a non-indigenous woman, and they have children. Their children will become 6'2" status Indian, and thus the cycle continues in each direction, marrying in or marrying out until you're erased. Your indigenousness is now up to the Indian Act to decide whether you're native enough to be registered a status Indian, because remember, you're still the Indian problem that the government wants to ensure they provide you and your lineage less access to treaty rights of certain benefits and services, as some examples below are: access to certain healthcare services and programs, exemption from paying federal and provincial taxes on income earned on a reserve, access to post-secondary education funding and scholarships, the right to hunt, fish, and trap on traditional lands, the ability to inherit land on a reserve, the right to vote in band council elections. Section 10 talks about how Indian status can be reinstated. This is important because many indigenous people have lost their Indian status due to discriminatory policies in the past and have had to fight to have it reinstated. The negative effects of Part 2 are that it has been used to divide indigenous communities and families. For example, if one person in a family loses their Indian status, they will not be able to pass it on to their children or spouse. This has led to situations where some members of a family or community have different legal rights and status than others, which can create tension and conflict. The Indian Act's definition of Indian has also been criticized for being based on colonial and racist ideas about race and bloodlines. This has led to situations where people who identify as indigenous and are connected to their community may not be considered Indian under the law, which can limit their access to rights and services. Finally, the Indian Act's rules around Indian status have been used to control and assimilate indigenous people. By taking away people's status and denying them rights, the government has tried to force indigenous people to assimilate into Canadian society and give up their traditions and culture. What do you think about this? Is it time to rewrite a new provision and allow the communities to make their own decisions? Or should this status Indian stay? What is the Indian solution? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section.